1 year ago, a simple night changed everything. A family torn apart, a home invaded, a life erased. And now, a 70-page document could serve justice, packed with details that could bring a federal agency to its knees. That's right. The grieving widow of Brian Malinowski has brought her full attention to the ATF and hit them with a massive lawsuit. Not only is she seeking damage fees, but also the return of her late husband's illegally confiscated firearm collection that is still locked up in an ATF evidence locker. You might have or probably have already heard about this lawsuit, but I think it's important that we take a deeper look because the newly revealed facts prove what gun owners have been saying all along. The ATF is nothing but a malicious and unconstitutional liability that the US government should drop immediately. To help you better understand what the ATF put this poor woman through, here is a clip taken from the police cruiser where she was left in the cold to ponder. I am going to warn you, though not much can be seen on screen, the audio is quite disturbing.
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?
We are the police. We're here for a search warrant.
Okay.
Okay.
My husband, I opened the door from the bedroom because he closed it. We thought it was an intruder. So I opened the door, he closed it, and I opened it again. That's when he got shot.
Yeah, she's got a little spot right there. And there's blood on her arm. I can't figure out what from, though.
Much of the video's hour and 16-minute runtime is filled with her cries of grief and confusion. Now, since it's been a year, let me remind you of the sheer depravity of the ATF's actions against Brian. In 2024, the ATF conjured up their vague and unconstitutional engaged in the business rule, in turn classifying anyone who sold guns privately as a federal firearms dealer. This way, they could pursue charges against those who didn't jump through their flaming hoops to get a permit. Now, we were warning gun owners about this months before the raid had even happened. Despite our efforts to put pressure on Biden's ATF, they were already hard at work to press law-abiding gun owners like Brian Malinowski under their thumb. So what did he do that was so terrible? He had no criminal record, a happy marriage, a long-term stable job as the executive manager of the Little Rock, Arkansas airport. What could such a clean-cut man have possibly done so wrong to deserve an impromptu death sentence? He was selling firearms at a gun show. Not even as a side hustle, but as a hobby, for fun. Well, some of these guns that he had sold had popped up in a crime, so the ATF traced it back to Brian and got a warrant to search his home. Under current law, you need a judge's approval to conduct a no-knock raid. The ATF, not having this, needed to adequately announce their arrival and give Malinowski a chance to comply. He was not given that chance, nor was he even informed of his situation in the slightest. Instead, he had his doorbell camera covered, his door broken down, and his life taken from him. And that takes us to today, where now his wife of 25 years, Maer Malinowski, is suing the ATF over a whole slew of charges, the most notable being negligent homicide and failure to knock or announce. Now, I've read the document. I'm not going to go over all of it since it is 70 pages, but there's a lot of key details that we didn't know about this tragedy until now. Not only does this expose the true incompetence and maliciousness of the ATF, but should they lose, there could be huge implications for their federal support, which could play a big role in their funding, especially now that we know what's going to happen possibly with the DEA merging with the ATF. But before I get into all of that, I want to remind you to like and subscribe if you haven't already. For this video, I couldn't find a GoFundMe or anything to directly support Mrs. Malinowski's fight against the ATF. So if you want to get involved and help tear down decades of gun control, sign our petition to nuke the NFA. The link to that is in the description below. So the first thing I want to point out is just how diligent their investigation was. They learned everything they could about Brian, yet despite admittedly knowing he wasn't a threat, they still treated him like one. Leading up to the actual raid, the ATF sent in undercover agents to a gun show to buy a firearm off of him. Quoting from the lawsuit itself, Brian answered one of the undercover agents' inquiries by noting that he was a private seller, meaning he believed he did not need an FFL. He had no ill intentions. He was unaware of both the ATF's new rule and the fact that he was even being investigated. Brian never received a letter of inquiry, audit, personal visit, or request for information from the ATF/DOJ. The only times they take this approach is when dealing with violent career criminals who could cover their tracks. But they didn't have a single reason to conclude that Brian was dangerous, and therefore transparency with the investigation would jeopardize any evidence. But when the evidence they're looking for are guns, I mean, it's not like Brian could have just woken up and flushed them down the toilet. In all seriousness, though, I mean, the ATF agents even said that Mr. Malinowski was the last person I would have imagined that we would have been in an armed confrontation with. Regardless, their superiors still decided to go through with what they call a high-risk dynamic entry, which is just a pompous way to say raid. For the Arkansas ATF, this is by far their most common approach to search warrants. So, shouldn't it have gone off without a hitch? For now, it's just speculation, but it's hard to imagine that ATF superiors were being anything but malevolent, especially when they failed to complete even the most rudimentary steps to this confrontation, like having your body cam turned on. And that brings me to another thing. The majority of the event-by-event breakdown was derived from testimonies because not a single agent turned on their body cam for the entire debacle. The only footage we have at all are from Brian's doorbell and a police dash cam from a single car pointed away from the Malinowski home. And even then, this wasn't intentional. All police dash cams automatically start recording the moment they flash the sirens. A siren, which, by the way, was ordered to chirp for only 1.5 seconds, which in turn added no awareness of law enforcement's presence to the Malinowskis or the neighbors who all said they slept through it. So, the ATF pull up in 10 unmarked sedans at the dead of night, snuck up to his door, and put tape over his doorbell camera. Now comes the point in which they have a legal requirement to sufficiently knock and identify themselves before they can just bust down a door and charge in. Their knocks and shouts lasted a total of 19 seconds and were so insufficient that the other teams surrounding the property couldn't even hear it. But Brian and Maer finally woke up when they heard the loud crash of their door being broken down. Brian does what frankly anyone would do. He gets his gun and slowly bends his head around the door frame to check it out. And what does he see? Shadowed figures breaching his home, with not a single piece of gear that would have identified them as law enforcement. Bizarrely enough, before the raid occurred, they covered all of their patches and insignias. The only piece of equipment that said ATF or police on it was a single ballistic shield that should have been held by the first agent through the door, that is Agent Sprinkles, and no, I did not make up that ATF agent's name. But for whatever reason, right before entering the home, Agent Sprinkles sets down the shield and left it on the porch, which not only furthered the confusion, but also endangered the agents if Brian was this malicious criminal that they're treating him as. Not knowing who they were, Brian fired a warning shot first, and after the bullet ricocheted and hit an agent in the leg, the ATF opened up. Only then, when a man was graphically murdered in front of his wife, did they identify who they were and tell the now traumatized widow to put her hands up. Brian hadn't died instantly, though. He was still barely holding on after being shot. Rather than letting Maer ride in the ambulance to get what little time left she had with her husband, she was kept in a cold car to sit and stew over what had just unfolded. But with no explanation, Maer only wondered what they could have possibly done to deserve this. She deserves justice. Brian deserves justice, alongside with everyone else the ATF has used as timber for their crusade against our rights. They knew what they were doing. They'd been investigating Brian for months before the actual raid. They knew he worked at an airport, meaning he was unarmed from 9 to 5. Why didn't they confront him then and conduct the raid simultaneously? Because they wanted to play soldier. And this is an increasingly frequent situation that we're seeing happen more and more. The fact of the matter is, even if matters happened differently and Brian was here to enjoy the life him and Maer built together, this raid would have still gone wrong because there is no right way to confiscate guns. And there is no right version of the ATF. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on this and doing everything we can to give the ATF the gut punch they deserve on the legislative front. But if you want to help the fight, go ahead and sign your petition to nuke the NFA. Once again, the link to that is in the description and comments below. Keep up the good fight. Thank you for watching.